Okay, so we all know who David Carrick is and what he was, so I'll make this as quick as I can. Many of you probably saw his live broadcast sentencing today, which I tried to set up myself to broadcast live here on the channel, but I couldn't get the sound to go through. Anyway, Carrick, former Metropolitan Police firearms officer, faced his first rape charge in October 2021, which prompted 11 other women to come forward with their reports. Carrick initially denied the charges but later pleaded guilty to the offences, which are said to have started in 2003. His first bout lasted until 2009 and he seemed to have taken some time off between then and 2016 as he started offending again until 2020. Although detectives have said that the pause of more than 6 years is unlikely to mean that he didn't offend during that time. In total, Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 charges against 12 women. Obviously, some of those women had multiple offences committed against them. Carrick apparently used his status as a Metropolitan Police constable to intimidate all of his victims, including the immigration status of one of them, threatening to report her if she reported him, and flashing his warrant card to another to make her feel at ease. The Court of Appeal has recently upheld that offending by a serving police constable who uses his status to aid his crimes can be an aggravating factor which deserves more punitive sentence. Mrs Justice Chima Grubb, sitting at Southwark Crown Court yesterday and today, said that the sentencing represented a spectacular downfall of a man in his position of responsibility and power. She said, "You have behaved as if you were untouchable. For nearly 2 decades you were proved right." However, she told Carrick that the survivors of his attacks had come together and have brought you low. During Carrick's abhorrent attacks, he is said to have used his police issue equipment to force his victims into submission, including one case where he placed what the victim thought to be a real handgun to her head. Mrs Justice Chima Grubb spoke about one account that was given in court by a nurse treating the injuries that he inflicted, that his fellow officers would protect him if she complained, and that it might just be better for her to move on. The judge said that this demonstrated how Carrick's position protected him and demonstrated the degree of moral corruption in the way in which survivors are seen in society. The problem is, this does happen. We have all seen incidents where police colleagues have ignored bad behaviour and in some cases, in order to try and protect their colleagues, covered it up. Maybe not so much in such a serious crime, but in serious crimes nonetheless. Mrs Justice Chima Grubb said this morning these convictions represent a spectacular downfall for a man charged with upholding the law and empowered to do so, even to the extent of being authorised to bear a firearm in the execution of his duty. Behind a public appearance of propriety and trustworthiness, you took monstrous advantage of women. You brazenly raped and sexually assaulted a number of women, some very brutally, and you behaved as if you were untouchable. You were bold and at times relentless, trusting that no victim would overcome her shame and fear to report you. For nearly 2 decades you were proved right, but now a combination by those 12 women, by coming forward, and your police colleagues by acting on their evidence, have exposed you and brought you low. You have lost your liberty, your job and your status. You have before you the prospect of a difficult time in custody for many years. Now, although Carrick eventually pleaded guilty, the judge said that he had shown no remorse for his crimes. A pre-sentence report was prepared for the court today in which it said that Carrick was a victim of child abuse and that as an adult he abused alcohol, being careful not to do so while at work. In February last year, Carrick was rushed to hospital from his cell at Belmarsh. At the time, he had only been charged with 29 attacks on 8 women. He was said to have been alone in his cell at the time. The judge remarked on this and told him that this will count in his favour when sentencing is passed, because it was feared he was suffering from depression and tried to off himself. In sentencing, Mrs Justice Chima Grubb gave Carrick a 20% reduction in sentence because of his guilty plea, but said that his suicide attempt was more to do with self-pity than remorse. Even with a 20% reduction, David Carrick, one of the most prolific sex offenders we've heard about, and certainly, next to Wayne Couzens, the worst piece of shit the police have ever inflicted upon the public, was sentenced to 36 life sentences for 49 charges against 12 women. Now, don't be fooled into thinking life sentence is actually life sentence. We're not in America here. Unfortunately, we're a lot softer. Those 36 life sentences equate to a minimum of just less than a year per sentence, as Carrick received 30 years, 239 days, before the possibility of parole. Carrick is currently 49, so will be potentially eligible for release at 79. Unlike Wayne Couzens, Carrick has escaped a whole life order as the judge said the threshold was not met. As you can imagine, The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, had something to say, but I'll not bore you with that horrible little man's drivel, as nothing he ever says is of any value. Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, said in a statement that David Carrick should never have been allowed to become a police officer or stay in policing for so long. His crimes are devastating, and our thoughts will be with his victims and their families today. A major overhaul of police standards is desperately needed, but there has been a serious failure by Conservative ministers to take action. After Sarah Everard's murder, we were promised change, but there are still no compulsory vetting requirements, and progress on driving up standards has been far too slow, letting down the victims and police officers who work so hard to keep communities safe. Labour will not sit back and leave the work to police forces. The next Labour government will change the law to make national rules on police vetting, misconduct and training mandatory for every police force. That will include an automatic suspension when allegations of serious crimes like rape and domestic abuse are made. We owe it to the victims in this hideous case to take the strongest action on police standards, and that's what Labour will deliver. So, using this as a party political broadcast. Well done, Labour. But my question is this: what's now going to happen to the people who allowed Carrick to remain in the job for so long? There is absolutely no way that anyone can explain their way out of the lack of action when receiving complaints in the past, and his colleagues don't tell me there wasn't someone who had serious concerns about him but did nothing, especially when they called him Bastard Dave. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said it is only right that he now faces at least 30 years behind bars. I pay tribute to the brave women who have come forward to hold him to account for his vile abuse. It is vital we uncover how he was able to wear the uniform for so long, and I welcome the Angelina Inquiry's investigation into David Carrick's criminal behaviour and the decision-making around his vetting. There is no place in our police for such heinous and predatory behaviour, and I look forward to receiving Lady Illish's findings. In her sentencing remarks, Mrs Justice Chima Grubb said, "I've read the statements made by 10 of the 12 victims, both as to their experiences and the impact it has had. There is powerful and compelling evidence of irretrievable devastation in the lives of those you abused. Survivors of rape and coercive control react and cope in different ways. Those differences are apparent in the statements. Each one is traumatised. One woman feels as if she has been lost for the last 19 years, encapsulating her experience with you as an encounter with evil, which has caused long-lasting psychological harm. Denial, anger, hatred, betrayal, shame, self-blame and fear of being labelled a victim are common emotions. You have shaped their lives, deprived them of the ability to trust men and form relationships. Some have damaged mental health and suffer loneliness. They continue to question their own judgment. They don't trust the police. Some have tried to get back control by behaving in dangerous ways, self-harming, interfering with their own health and relationships, pushing boundaries and almost destroying trust in those they value the most. Those you controlled are trying to recover their self-esteem and lost relationships, including with a daughter who self-harms and still has nightmares because of your abuse of her mother. These women are not weak or ineffectual. They were victims of your criminal mindset. The malign influence of men like you in positions of power stands in the way of a revolution of women's dignity. It is remarkable that, with one woman being driven to report an allegation against you, despite your position and power, others felt able to act. Even today, courage calls to courage everywhere, and it's a voice that cannot be denied. Now, we're still waiting for a statement from the Metropolitan Police themselves, and I guess we shouldn't expect them to come right out and be honest, as they will be putting their heads together with the Met's PR department to try and find a way to make them look good after all of this. Good luck with that. Anyway, Carrick's reign of terror is now over, and as we patiently await the next, all that's left to say... Another one bites the dust.